ecosystem also talks to the ecosystem in the bladder, in the ecosystem on the skin, in the ecosystem in the ear canal, and throughout the body. It is in communication with all those things. So if you're off balance someplace like the gut, ultimately you're probably going to end up off balance in other places. As an infant, we all are born with a leaky gut. We want to have a leaky gut because we get passive immunity from breast milk from mom. So if mom had the measles or had an immunization to measles and has antibodies to measles, that goes in via breast milk, right? And then it leaks out into the tissue for the baby so that the baby has these circulating antibodies, and that's called passive immunity. So let's say that you have an allergy, and let's just pick dairy, because that's a common one that people don't necessarily digest well. But let's say that that gets in because they're substituting cow milk for mom's milk, and your immune system hasn't developed yet to a place where you can really manage that on your own. And then that gets into the tissue, and it creates some inflammation because it's a weird molecule, it's a big molecule, and then your immune system is like, hey, what are you doing here? You're not supposed to be here. And then it'll flag it. And it may take a while to develop an immune reaction to it because babies don't have spectacular immune systems. They take time to develop. But this, once in a while, if it leaks in, maybe no big deal. But if it's a frequent thing and it's a very permeable membrane here at the level of the gut, then things get in here and the tissue starts to react to it. The immune system starts to react to it. It's primed to react to these as invaders instead of something benevolent. Now, as that baby gets older, you start to develop tight junctions. So these cells in the gut lining start to bind together. So that means that the gut is no longer leaky. Things can't pass through it. So you have this whole tube running through your body that is technically the outside world because it's very selective about what it'll let into your inner world. In the colon, you start to develop gut bugs called your microbiome or your flora. This process of these good gut bugs starts with birth. So during delivery, the baby gets some of these from mom, and then if the baby's breastfeeding, the baby gets some of these from the skin while nursing. Then babies, as you know, pick up everything, stick it in their mouth, they eat dirt, all that stuff has microbes in it, many of which are beneficial to the human body. So if that's going well, then these provide some additional immune resistance there. If they're nice and healthy and these barriers stay intact, then everything is good. Unfortunately, this can all break down for several reasons. You get food poisoning and you get some bad bugs, and those bad bugs come in and they start to like wipe out and crowd out the good bugs and they take over. That creates some inflammation, and then they break down this lining here, and then more food leaks in and that triggers the immune system to have a response. So the microbiome here in the gut, we don't think about it very much, but we have this whole ecosystem here, and keeping that in balance is really important. The gut ecosystem also talks to the ecosystem in the bladder, in the ecosystem on the skin, in the ecosystem in the ear canal, and throughout the body. It is in communication with all those things. So if you're off balance someplace like the gut, ultimately you're probably going to end up off balance in other places. All right, so we talked about how digestion should work. We talked a little bit about some of the things that can go wrong there, but the microbiome is so important. If you have an altered microbiome for whatever reason, that can really be problematic. And if someone is genetically predisposed to have an autoimmune disease, we know that the microbiome is altered in people who have all sorts of autoimmune diseases, whether that be ulcerative colitis, Crohn's, rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, or other autoimmune diseases. That can be a problem. And in fact, there are some autoimmune diseases that start with a gut infection. So there's a kind of reactive arthritis that starts with a GI infection and then becomes systemic inflammation that leads to autoimmune joint disease in susceptible people. So you want to really do everything that you can to guard your digestion as much as possible. So that is your motivation for this Monday. You want to make sure that you're taking care of yourself so that you're staying in optimal function. If you're not optimally digesting, you want to get back on track with that. And the body does want homeostasis. So one of the best ways to do that really is by changing your diet and cutting out things that may be irritating and start working from there. And it is Testimonial Tuesday, and we are talking about immunity and the gut right now. So I want to talk to you about a case with two sisters, one who had psoriasis and the other who had eczema. So for these two gals, I saw them when they were 11 and 12. And the one with eczema, it was pretty clear that she was allergic to dairy. Whenever she would have dairy, her face would flush red and then sort of ash over, and then she would break out in the creases of the arms or behind the knees or in various places with an eczematous rash. And the other daughter had psoriasis. It largely was around the scalp, but particularly behind the back of the right ear. and a little bit on the eyelid there, and then on the elbows and knees, which is common with psoriasis. But probably the worst complaint that she had was in the scalp, because she felt like the flakiness from the psoriasis looked like dandruff. So these two girls were from the same family. Both these girls, because their skin is the way they see the world and they were tweens, they were really conscious about how they looked and what their peers thought of them. They were really motivated to make some changes to get their skin under control. For both of them, they had different food triggers. So like I said, one of them was allergic to dairy, and finally was able to take that out when she realized that it wasn't worth having her skin itch and erupt. And then the other one had a significant allergy to egg, which she didn't know when she came in, but taking eggs out of her diet seemed to really help her skin significantly. So the daughter with eczema, she really preferred more of a ketogenic paleo type diet, and the other one really tended towards being vegetarian. So for both these girls, we started them out with bone broth. They both really enjoyed congee, so we did a bone broth based congee for breakfast. And bone broth has a lot of collagen in it and other nutrients that those enterocytes, the lining of the gut, those cells really like to use for food, and is very protective to the lining of the GI tract. So they both enjoyed that, so that was an easy win. The other thing I recommend for a lot of people who are working on gut healing is what I call slimy food or slippery food. It doesn't sound very appealing, but this can be things like chia pudding or the overnight cooked oatmeal so that it's nice and soft. And things of that nature that are soothing to the GI lining. The other thing along with that is something called DGL, so that's deglycerided licorice. So the glycerided part is potentially able to raise your blood pressure, so they take that part out. The licorice part is soothing and healing for the GI lining. And then another thing that can be really helpful is a supplement called L-glutamine. And the cells of your GI lining love this food. They love, 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 love it. It's very nourishing for them. So that was incorporated as well, and easy to add into other things, especially smoothies. When you have a problem in the gut, there's a lot of cells that hold histamine in there that'll dump histamine, that can create inflammation, that can break down the lining of the gut. You also have a lot of those same histamine holding immune cells in your skin as well as your respiratory tract. So when we think about healing the gut, part of what we're healing is the reactivity to things and calming down the immune system so that you're not just dumping out histamine willy-nilly. So a lot of times when there's irritation in the gut, there can be irritation in the airway and the skin as well. And that's why we say that all health begins in the gut, because that's where your immune system starts being activated towards these things that may be irritating. So we did, especially for the skin, but in general, make both their diets high in essential fatty acids and getting a lot of healthy fats, because that creates the membrane of each individual cell is a lipid layer, and that those lipids to make the lining of that cell need to be healthy lipids. So these young ladies had the advantage of being young on their side, and so we were able to get there and start doing some significant repair before this had gone on for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. So they responded really quickly, as a lot of kids do, and both are relatively symptom-free, and when they have an outbreak, they realize that, oh yeah, I strayed from my eating plan and ate dairy. I had ice cream with a friend, or I had eggs for breakfast one day. So they found that they can manage to not have outbreaks hardly ever, if at all, by just staying on top of their dietary choices. But because they've gone through a gut healing protocol and are doing much better, they have a lot more flexibility and can eat a whole lot of other things besides one or two little items. Just want to share that success with you. And the gut is more than just the gut. You may not be experiencing any GI symptoms, but it can affect your immune system and your entire body and come out in unexpected ways, including in the skin. If you have any comments, please leave them in the box. And if you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer. And it is Wake Up Wednesday, and we are talking about gut health and the immune system. So a lot of times I will have people do intermittent fasting. If you're working on gut health, this can be particularly important for you, because giving yourself a longer period of time without having to process food allows your gut a little bit of downtime to work on repair, because it's not having to also take care of the food that you're bringing in. So spacing out meals can be really important, and not snacking all in between or grazing all throughout the day can be really important in helping your gut to recover. Eating isn't necessarily a bad thing, but sometimes a rest is needed so that you can take care of some cleanup in the GI tract. If you are not intermittent fasting and you are interested in a breakfast smoothie that is helpful, I like to add L-glutamine when needed for people who are working on gut repair, because that's an amazing superfood for your GI tract. All the cells in the GI tract love to eat that for food. You can also have breakfast with some congee in a bone broth base. Not everybody can tolerate bone broth. If you have a problem with histamine intolerance, that may not be for you. But then there's also overnight oatmeal, which again is a little bit more of a slippery food that I love for breakfast. And I love having something nice and warm and nourishing right when I wake up, especially when I don't have to cook it beforehand. Teas that I like for the morning time, if you are intermittent fasting and you just want something light, a little bit of liquid, can be marshmallow or slippery elm bark tea that you can just buy off the shelf in a tea bag. You don't have to do anything special to track that down. And then other things that can aid in digestion but are a little bit bitter are dandelion root and burdock, and those may not be as palatable by themselves, so you may want to mix those with something, but those also are bitters and they stimulate your digestion, including stimulating bile. So if you have a tricky gallbladder, you may want to avoid those too. And that is it. I hope you're waking up well, and I will talk to you later. Hi, I'm Dr. Angela Mackay, chiropractor and naturopathic physician, and it is Tactical Thursday. So I want to talk to you about some key things that you can start doing right now to improve your digestion. And the number one thing is what we talked about last week with digestion hygiene. So you want to get yourself into that rest and digest state so that you are actually in a place that you can process and take in all the nutrition from your food. One of the things that can aid in that we sort of glossed over last time is breathing. So making sure that you're doing a lot of belly breathing, getting enough air in and oxygen in is going to help switch you over to that parasympathetic state, because shallow breathing is what you do when you're all stressed out. But if you feel nice and safe, you can take nice, deep, full belly breaths, and that'll signal to your nervous system that everything is a-okay. Other things that are really common out there that you may think about and look at are things like apple cider vinegar. If you think you may be suffering from not enough stomach acid, you can get similar symptoms to having too much stomach acid, and that is indigestion and heartburn and what's called GERD. Sometimes adding apple cider vinegar creates a little bit more acidity in the stomach and stimulates digestion to start producing the necessary components to be able to digest your food. The way that you would do that is you take about a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar and about a third of a cup of water before you eat by about 15-20 minutes. It can, if you already have too much acid, this can be really uncomfortable and it can burn. So you don't want to do this if you know for sure that your problem is too much acid and not enough. Sometimes people want to come off their proton pump inhibitors or their antacid medications like Nexium and Prevacid and Zantac, but I don't recommend ever that you cold turkey those, because if you stop taking those, all of a sudden you're going to have a rebound production of acid, and that is super duper uncomfortable. I've had some patients who've just gone off and done that on their own despite my warning, and every report I've heard back about that is that it did not go well. So you cannot just cold turkey stop taking those medications. You have to ease into it or you will have a world of heartburn. In general, you want to be eating a whole foods diet. So you want to be able to recognize what your food is, where it came from, and recognize it, that it was in its natural state. You can envision. The number one biggest thing that will alter your microbiome and your gut is your diet. And that has been shown across the board, study after study after study. If you want to alter your microbiome, eat a healthy diet. So one of the ways to do that, like I said, is eating a whole foods diet. You want to reduce any foods that cause symptoms, and that can be hard to tease apart, because when it comes to food intolerance, you may eat something so regularly and that particular food creates some inflammation, so your body has adapted by creating more cortisol to counter that inflammation, and so it sort of smooths it out, and then you stop eating that food and either you don't feel good at all, or you feel fine and it doesn't feel like it's any different until you reintroduce that food after a period of going without it. So the number one standard for being able to determine what foods are problematic for you is called an elimination diet. An elimination diet involves cutting all the possible inflammatory foods out of your diet and having a very basic diet with simple foods, white rice, chicken, or fish may be involved, or very easy to digest foods that typically are non-allergenic. Usually take out wheat, dairy, eggs, coffee, most things that most people love to eat, and it gets pretty bland for a bit. And then you do that diet for anywhere from 2 to 4, sometimes even 6 weeks, and then you systematically add one food back in every 3 days to a week. So if you've cut out dairy, for instance, you can cut out dairy for 4 to 6 weeks, and then just cheese it up for like 3 days. Have cereal with milk for breakfast, or add milk to your oatmeal if that was something that you were eating on the elimination diet. And then you could add cheese, you could add various types of dairy products, yogurt, whatever you want in there, and then notice how you react to that. if you don't have any reaction, you can leave that food back in and then wait a week and then go on to the next food. And then maybe the next food you add in would be wheat. So you could have toast at breakfast, you could have a little bit of pasta, and you could add more wheat into your diet and see how that reacts over the course of a week or so. So that's how an elimination diet works. That is the gold standard. It's free, essentially, because you have to eat anyway. So there's no extra out-of-pocket cost besides your grocery bill. But it is time-consuming and difficult sometimes when you have other people in your family who are not interested in doing that with you, or you've got kids, which was the case in my case when I just opted to do the blood test because it was worth the expense for me versus the hassle of trying to figure out with 3 kids and a spouse and myself who was allergic to what. So the blood test, I would say, can give you a pretty good understanding of what things might be triggering, but the goal is always to heal that, not just take out this food, that food, take out another food, and then suddenly there's nothing left you can eat. Because if you don't do the underlying healing work, whatever you're eating, you can still develop an additional intolerance to, and I want your world to get bigger, not smaller. So healing the gut so that you can tolerate more things, as many things as possible, and have as varied a diet as possible is the ultimate goal. So that's Tactical Thursday. It always starts with food hygiene and then goes from there. And if you're having struggles, give me a call, let me know, sign up for an appointment, and get in and get seen.